At 5:14 local time in the northern Arabian Sea, the Combat Information Center aboard the lead Iranian warship caught a slow-moving submerged contact sliding along the lower edge of the grid. It was deep enough to stay out of sight, steady enough to raise immediate concern. No merchant traffic matched its profile, and no friendly vessel was supposed to be in that sector. Its acoustic trace was narrow, controlled, and unusually quiet. The sonar operator leaned in. Bearing 094, weak transient, possible submarine. In an instant, the mood inside the compartment changed. Chairs rolled closer, voices dropped. Surface radar remained steady, but below the waterline, all attention locked onto the same moving mark. The captain reacted at once. Classify. The reply came back almost too fast, and that was the first sign of trouble. Likely hostile submarine. The label entered the room before certainty did. Outside, dawn spread a pale light across the sea. 2 Iranian warships moved through calm water in tight coordination, their bows angled slightly apart, their hulls carving white foam into the gray-blue morning. From the deck, nothing seemed unusual. No flames, no smoke, no visible threat, only steel, wake, and silence. Inside the lead ship, that silence was over. Hold bearing. Narrowband analysis. The sonar team worked quickly through machinery tones, harmonics, blade rate, and intermittent flow noise. The contact remained quiet, but it was no longer something they could ignore. It had entered exactly the kind of space surface commanders dislike most. Too close to dismiss, too deep to confirm, too deliberate to feel harmless. On the second Iranian warship, the CIC received the track and accepted it almost immediately. A second command team reached nearly the same conclusion at the same time. 2 warships, 1 underwater contact, and 1 assumption beginning to harden into action. Range estimating inside engagement envelope. Then the captain gave the order that changed the tone of the morning. Bring tubes ready. Below the waterline, hatches opened. A torpedo crew moved with practiced efficiency. Mechanical locks were checked. Guidance settings were entered. No one on board could actually see the submarine they were preparing to strike. They had only a sound, a pattern, and the belief that they had identified a danger before it could act first. At 5:15, the lead ship eased slightly to port to improve attack geometry. The second warship widened its spacing, forming the familiar shape of a coordinated hunt. The surface movement was clean, deliberate, professional. Then the first active sonar pulse hit the sea. It drove downward like a hammer through water. Far below, inside the red-lit control room of a U.S. submarine, every watchstander heard it through the hull before anyone said a word. The sound arrived sharp, metallic, unmistakable. The sonar chief stayed calm. Active ping, bearing 089. The officer of the deck looked toward the captain. A second pulse followed, harder than the first. Then came the next report. Transient in the water, high-speed screw, possible weapon launch. No one rushed. That was the difference. No shouting, no confusion, only procedure compressed into seconds. The captain stepped closer to the plot. Khan, take her 150 feet deeper. Come right 3 degrees. Maintain quiet. The diving officer repeated every command. The planes adjusted. The submarine tilted gently and slipped downward into colder water. The lighting stayed low. The voices stayed controlled. On the waterfall display, noise sharpened into a more defined shape. The sonar chief fixed on it. Weapon bearing steady. Closing. A decoy launcher was made ready. The captain watched the line for a beat, then gave the order. Deploy countermeasure. A compact acoustic decoy slipped into the black water and activated behind them, throwing out a false signature louder, rougher, and more tempting than the submarine itself. Meanwhile, the real boat kept descending, engines trimmed for quiet, hull slipping toward the thermal layer where sound bends and clear answers start to disappear. Above, the Iranian ships interpreted the change exactly as they expected. To them, the target was reacting under pressure. That strengthened confidence, and confidence deepened commitment. Target maneuvering, weapon tracking. On the lead ship, the captain gave another order. Maintain pressure. Don't let it out of the box. The warships increased speed. Their propellers bit harder into the sea. Self-noise rose. Active sonar continued pulsing, each blast briefly illuminating the water column, and at the same time revealing their own positions to anything listening below. And something below was listening. Inside the American submarine, the first torpedo began to drift toward the decoy. Its bearing shifted a few degrees, then a few more. The sonar chief reported with the same measured calm as before. Weapon diverting, countermeasure effective. No one reacted with relief. There was no room for that. A second report followed almost immediately as the surface ships adjusted position. Both contacts repositioning. They're prosecuting. The captain studied the plot. One weapon had been pulled away, but the situation was no longer uncertain. Two warships were now fully committed to a real underwater pursuit. The water above was growing louder by the second, and that helped as much as it complicated. Take us below the layer. The submarine went deeper. The active pings weakened, then began to distort. Machinery noise from the Iranian ships spread wider across the acoustic picture. The ocean itself was starting to work against the hunters. On the lead Iranian warship, operators watched their once clean solution begin to soften. The contact that had seemed pinned now felt less stable, less predictable, less certain. What had looked like a straightforward pursuit was turning into a problem of angles, noise, and missing information. Then the symbol shifted again. It had not been destroyed. It had not been confirmed. It was simply gone. Somewhere deeper, darker, and far more difficult to track. At 5:17, the first underwater weapon ran past the real submarine and followed the decoy into open water. Below, the American boat slipped even deeper into the one part of the fight that surface warships could disrupt, but never fully control. And in that quiet descent, the balance of the encounter began to shift. What the Iranian crews believed was a trapped intruder had just entered the one environment where their edge started to fade, and the pursuit was only beginning. At 5:17 local time, the first weapon was still moving without a clean track when the water around the American submarine changed in temperature, density, and sound. Inside the control room, the descent was measured down to the foot. No wasted rudder, no unnecessary speed, no metallic noise. The boat slipped beneath the thermal layer and let the sea begin working in its favor. The sonar chief kept his headset tight. Weapon no longer on direct intercept. Countermeasure holding. The captain never looked up. Give them nothing. Maintain ultra quiet. Above them, the two Iranian warships still believed they remained in control of the engagement. On the lead ship's display, the false contact was still moving, noisy enough to hold attention, convincing enough to justify continued pressure. The second ship adjusted formation to close the gap, engines digging harder into the sea as both vessels tried to narrow every possible escape route. Then another active sonar pulse hit the water. It went down hard, a clean artificial OODA through the sea, lighting the water column for a brief instant before returning distorted and messy. Too much reverberation, too much noise from their own ships. Inside the lead Iranian CIC, operators leaned closer to their screens. The contact picture was still present, but it was no longer clean. The target appeared to drift one way, then another, its range shifting just enough to create doubt without fully breaking confidence. Reacquire and refine, the captain ordered. The lead ship turned again. So did the second. Their helmsman reacted immediately, but every correction added more propeller turbulence, more hull flow noise, more acoustic clutter to an already unstable underwater picture. Below, the American submarine heard all of it. The sonar waterfall thickened with sound, cavitation from aggressive turns, machinery tones from both surface ships, and the repeated crack of active pings. The ocean was no longer quiet, but it was becoming easier to read. The officer of the deck spoke softly. Surface contacts increasing speed. Understood, the captain said. Hold course. 2 knots. In any other setting, that would have felt painfully slow. Here, it was discipline. Speed meant noise. Noise meant exposure. The boat stayed patient. Every movement was measured against survival. The diving officer checked depth and trim. The hull settled deeper into colder water. The thermal boundary above now distorted the worst of the incoming sonar returns, bending sound, scattering clarity, and weakening the hunter's clean attack geometry. At 5:18, the lead Iranian warship made its second mistake. Believing the target had shifted to starboard, the captain ordered a sharper correction and tightened the search pattern. The second ship widened to maintain coverage. For several tense seconds, both warships maneuvered aggressively to trap a contact they no longer truly understood. On their displays, it looked like pressure. Underwater, it sounded like confusion. Contact bearing drift increasing, one Iranian operator reported. Which contact? The captain snapped. A pause followed, too short to calm him, too long to hide the problem. The sonar team had started seeing 2 different behaviors in the water. One was loud enough to track from time to time, almost certainly the decoy. The other was quieter, deeper, and erratic in a way that made identification far more difficult. For the first time that morning, a new possibility entered the room. The submarine they believed they were pushing might no longer be the one that mattered. Inside the American submarine, there was no need for guesswork. The sonar chief had already separated the picture. Lead surface combatant on our port quarter. Second combatant repositioning aft. Decoy still drawing weapon noise away. Then he stopped. A new line had appeared. Additional transient. The captain turned. Clarify. Possible second submerged contact. Very faint. Bearing 217. No one spoke after that. No one had to. The meaning landed at once. There might be another submarine in the water. The captain did not ask over open voice whether it was friendly. He did not say more than necessary. In that compartment, the implication moved faster than words. He studied the plot in silence. One American submarine had already been engaged. The Iranian ships were still fully committed. And now, somewhere in the dark water behind the encounter, another quiet contact was beginning to trace its own line across the battle space. Above, the Iranian warships kept sending active sonar into the sea, and with every transmission, they made their own positions more exact to anything listening passively below. The hunters were filling the ocean with sound, and in doing that, they were revealing themselves. At 5:19, the first weapon burned out after chasing the decoy and ended harmlessly in empty water. No blast reached the control room, only the disappearance of the threat tone. "Weapon expired," the sonar chief said. The captain gave a single nod. "Do not change posture." That restraint mattered. A less disciplined crew might have tried to break away at speed, change depth abruptly, or use the moment to run. The American submarine did none of that. It stayed calm, quiet, and as difficult to detect as possible, while the warships above struggled against the ocean and their own assumptions. On the second Iranian warship, operators were now dealing with two separate unknowns: a primary contact that kept fading, and a faint secondary bearing that had not appeared in the solution just minutes earlier. The attack box they had tried to seal was beginning to open instead, and the more they maneuvered, the less stable the picture became. Then one report cut through the CIC. "Possible contact astern." The captain turned immediately. "Astern. Confirm. Unconfirmed. Intermittent. Low signature." A low signature contact astern meant only one serious concern. Something might have slipped behind them. On the bridge, everything still looked calm. The sea remained flat. Sunrise spread wider across the horizon as if nothing had changed. But beneath that smooth surface, the geometry of the fight had already started to reverse. The Iranian warships had engaged what they believed was a vulnerable American submarine and forced it deeper. Instead, they had stepped into an underwater problem they could no longer fully map, against a target they could no longer track with confidence, while a second faint contact began to appear at the edges of the picture like a warning. And for the first time that morning, the crews aboard those warships were no longer sure they were hunting alone. At 5:19 local time, the sea above remained flat and pale in the early light. Below it, the shape of the encounter had changed completely. Inside the control room of the American submarine, the plot no longer showed a simple escape. The first torpedo was gone. The decoy had done its work. The two Iranian warships were still maneuvering aggressively, still transmitting, still trying to force the engagement forward. But now, every turn they made and every active sonar pulse they sent into the water gave the submarine below a wider and clearer picture of the fight. The sonar chief listened without moving. "Lead surface combatant steady on port quarter. Second contact aft opening slightly." Then he focused on the weaker line. "Secondary submerged transient still present. Bearing 215. Very low signature." The captain kept his eyes on the plot. No one said what all of them were thinking. They did not need to. A faint submerged contact behind the Iranian formation, moving carefully and remaining passive, suggested what the surface ships had not yet accepted. They were no longer pressing a single submarine. They were operating inside a much larger underwater problem. "Con," the captain said quietly. "Come left 2 degrees. Keep it slow." "Aye, Captain. Left 2 degrees." The boat responded with almost no sensation at all. That was the point. In the dark water below the layer, danger came from being detected, not from dramatic movement. Every foot of depth and every degree of course mattered. Above, inside the lead Iranian warship's CIC, certainty was beginning to slip. The operators had expected the picture to sharpen after the first torpedo drove the submarine deeper. Instead, the returns were breaking apart. One contact line was too loud and unstable. Another was too quiet and intermittent. Range estimates kept shifting. Bearings began to overlap. The sea had become crowded with uncertainty. "Rebuild the track," the captain ordered. The operators moved quickly through narrowband analysis, bearing drift, timed range estimates, and active returns layered over passive data. But the harder they tried to fuse the picture, the more obvious the central problem became. The contact they had first engaged no longer behaved like a single, isolated target. On the second Iranian warship, the commander reached the same conclusion from a different angle. A delayed active return, a fluctuating passive line, and a suspicious acoustic gap off the stern all suggested a contact in the blind sector. "Report stern picture. Intermittent, sir. Low signature. Possibly submerged." Possibly submerged was no longer reassuring. At 5:20, the lead Iranian ship turned harder to recover its attack geometry. The second warship adjusted with it, widening briefly, then crossing inward to hold the box. From above, the maneuver looked coordinated. Underwater, it sounded worse. Propeller wash spread across the spectrum. Flow noise thickened. The two warships were now interfering with their own search, filling the sea with so much acoustic clutter that the contact they most needed to understand was becoming even harder to classify. Inside the American submarine, that noise became an advantage. The sonar chief separated one set of harmonics from the rest and marked them. Lead combatant opening starboard turn, second combatant crossing behind. The fire control team began building a cleaner tactical picture. Bearing lines stabilized, speed estimates improved. Every Iranian maneuver meant to contain the submarine was instead exposing more of the true shape of the surface formation. The captain studied the solution. Still no order to arm weapons, still no rush. That restraint defined the room. This was not panic below the surface, it was precision. Men who had already survived the first attack were now watching the encounter slow into something colder, quieter, and far more exact. Then the sonar chief heard it again. Secondary submerged contact now clearer. The captain turned. Direction? Moving along their rear quarter. Slow, controlled. Still passive? That was enough. The American submarine had not simply slipped out of danger. Somewhere behind the Iranian warships, another quiet underwater presence was now moving into a position that made the surface commanders vulnerable from a direction they did not control. At 5:21, the lead Iranian warship sent out another powerful active sonar pulse. The signal crashed downward, spread through the layer, and returned distorted. For a brief moment, the sonar display lit up with reflected energy and false structure. And inside that noise, one operator caught something that did not belong. A close transient. Not a head, not a beam. From behind, below, and much closer than expected. The operator froze for half a second before speaking. Possible submerged contact closer than previous estimate. The captain stepped toward the display. Which one? The reply came back with visible hesitation. Unclear. That single word did more to damage confidence than the first missed torpedo. On the bridge above, nothing seemed different. The bow still cut smoothly through calm water. The horizon remained open. The morning light kept growing. But inside both Iranian combat centers, the pursuit was turning into something far more dangerous. Awareness without control. Inside the American submarine, the fire control team kept refining the data in near silence. Lead combatant solution improving. Second combatant bearing steady. The captain watched the plot tighten, then gave a brief instruction. Hold them. He did not say, fire. He did not have to. The order meant keep the track, preserve the advantage, and let the surface ships reveal the rest of their pattern on their own. Then came the clearest sign yet that the encounter had turned. The second Iranian warship suddenly changed course away from its previous line, not as part of a clean attack pattern, but as a reaction. Something in the stern sector had forced caution into the formation. The box they had tried to build on the surface was now opening at the rear. The sonar chief confirmed it. They're reacting to the secondary contact. That was the moment the mistake became impossible to miss. The two Iranian warships had launched their attack believing they had cornered a single American submarine. Instead, they had driven themselves into an underwater battle space where at least one U.S. boat remained fully intact, while another silent contact was now pressing into the outer edges of their formation. No missile had crossed the sky, no hull had split open, no blast announced the shift. But below the surface, the outcome was already beginning to take shape. The submarine they had tried to trap was no longer simply escaping. It was tracking them with growing precision. And somewhere behind the Iranian ships, another unseen submarine was moving into a position close enough to turn confusion into fear. At 5:21 local time, the Iranian warships were still moving fast enough to look aggressive from the surface. Underneath, they were already starting to lose control of the fight. In the control room of the American submarine, the tactical plot had sharpened into something clean. The lead Iranian warship had turned twice in less than 2 minutes. The second ship had widened, crossed back, then drifted out of position in response to a submerged contact off its stern. What had begun as a coordinated pursuit now looked fractured, noisy, and increasingly defensive. The sonar chief never lifted his eyes from the display. Lead surface combatant bearing 031, second combatant bearing 068. Secondary submerged contact still aft of their formation. The captain studied the range lines. Any sign they have a solid track? The answer came back at once. Negative, Captain. They're searching through clutter. That was the quiet center of the encounter. The Iranian crew still had weapons, speed, and visibility on the surface. But in the one dimension that mattered most now, they were no longer acting from knowledge. They were reacting to fragments. The American submarine stayed below the layer, almost motionless by outside standards. Every correction was so slight it barely registered. The boat did not need speed, it needed position. "Con," the captain said, "come right 1 degree. Make turns for 1 knot." "1 knot, aye," the helmsman answered with microscopic precision. The submarine edged into a better line on the lead warship while keeping its own acoustic presence near the edge of detectability. Inside the compartment, men moved only when necessary. Hands touched switches carefully. Even paper was handled quietly. Across the water above, the lead Iranian warship sent another active pulse downward. It returned jagged and incomplete, broken apart by layer distortion and by the self-generated noise of both ships maneuvering too hard with too little certainty. The operator stared at the return, then adjusted filters, trying to force order out of a picture that no longer wanted to stay still. "Contact intermittent," he reported. The captain stepped closer. "Which contact?" Again that pause. "Primary uncertain. Possible additional submerged return." On the second Iranian ship, the bridge and CIC were no longer moving with the same confidence as before. Orders still came quickly, but they were no longer supporting one clean plan. One officer wanted to continue pressing forward. Another recommended widening out to clear the stern sector. Sonar wanted more time. Weapons wanted classification. Helm wanted stable course guidance. Instead of tightening the trap, the formation was beginning to open. Inside the American submarine, the fire control team watched that opening take shape in real time. "Lead combatant crossing into favorable aspect," one operator said. "Second combatant no longer mutually supporting." The captain nodded once. That was what surface commanders feared most in anti-submarine operations. Not just losing the target, but losing formation discipline while the target remained somewhere close by. Once mutual support started to break down, each ship became more exposed. Blind sectors widened, reaction time shrank, every new sound carried more weight. At 5:22, the secondary submerged contact behind the Iranian ships shifted just enough to force recognition. On the lead Iranian display, it was still faint. Not enough for confidence, but more than enough for alarm. "Possible contact astern holding low speed." The captain turned sharply. "Holding?" "Yes, sir." And controlled meant deliberate. Not drifting debris, not biological noise, not some random false return. This was a real submerged contact moving slowly and staying quiet behind the formation, exactly the kind of presence no surface commander wants to acknowledge out loud. For the first time that morning, the lead Iranian warship shifted its priority from attack to self-protection. "Break left, open the stern, reassess the picture." The order went straight to the helm. The bow began to swing. The ship's propellers dug harder into the water. Flow noise surged along the hull. On the second ship, the commander reacted instantly, but not cleanly. Instead of restoring tight coordination, he pulled farther away to guard against the contact behind them. The gap widened. Cross-coverage weakened. From above, it looked cautious. From below, it looked like the beginning of a retreat. Inside the American submarine, the sonar chief tracked the shift in real time. Lead combatant increasing turn rate. Second combatant opening distance. They're breaking attack geometry. No one in the control room treated that as a win. Not yet. Not because the advantage wasn't there, but because submarine crews are trained to distrust easy endings. A surface ship under pressure can still act unpredictably. A confused formation can still respond. The risk hadn't disappeared. It had changed shape. The captain leaned over the plot. "Update solutions. Hold all options." "Aye, Captain. Holding all options." That phrase carried weight. The submarine now had improving positioning on the lead ship. The second warship was exposing its flank in brief moments as it widened out. And the submerged contact astern, almost certainly another American boat, was applying pressure without a single active transmission, without a visible trace. This was control in its purest form. Not noise, not spectacle, position. At 5:23, the lead Iranian warship sent another active sonar pulse. But inside the American control room, it sounded different now. It no longer carried the sharp edge of a pursuing hunter. It sounded like a ship checking the darkness around itself. The sonar chief said it plainly. They're no longer prosecuting. They're looking for a safe direction. On the Iranian bridge, the officers could not see what was below them. They could not see the submarine they had been chasing. They could not see the second contact behind them. They could not measure how close the situation had come. But they could feel it slipping through the reports, arriving one after another. Intermittent contacts, unstable bearings, broken geometry, uncertainty to the stern. They had initiated the encounter, they had forced the first move, they had driven a submarine deeper, and now they were the ones turning away from the center of it. Inside the American submarine, the captain gave no speech. He simply watched the tracks separate. The formation loosened. The distance increased, one controlled mile at a time. No torpedo left the tube. No missile broke the surface. No explosion marked the shift. There didn't need to be one. By the time the Iranian crews understood they were no longer closing in on a trapped submarine, but instead pulling away from two silent contacts in a stronger position, the message had already been delivered in the only language submariners fully trust: geometry, distance, restraint. By now, the Iranian warships were no longer hunting. They were backing away. At 5:23 local time, the sea looked unchanged. From the bridge of the lead warship, the horizon stayed wide and pale in the early morning light. The water rolled in steady, low swells. No smoke marked the sky. No debris floated. No silhouette broke the line between sea and dawn. But inside both combat information centers, the outcome was already clear. The sonar picture no longer supported pursuit. Active returns were unstable. Bearings drifted. The stern sector remained uncertain, complicated by a quiet submerged contact that no one could fully classify, and no one could safely ignore. The attack geometry from minutes earlier was gone. Forward contact intermittent, stern contact still possible submerged, low signature. That was enough. The lead captain didn't announce a withdrawal in dramatic terms. He didn't need to. Reduce turn rate, hold separation, rebuild the picture. Rebuild the picture meant acknowledging that the old one no longer worked. On the second warship, the commander reached the same conclusion from his own display. His ship had widened out to protect its stern, but in doing so, it had lost the coordinated coverage needed to track a submarine effectively. They were still in the same water, but they were no longer operating as one. Below the surface, inside the American submarine, nothing changed in tone. The control room remained dim, steady, and precise. The crew didn't move like a team coming out of danger. They moved like a team, making sure it stayed that way. The sonar chief continued tracking both surface contacts. Lead combatant opening slowly. Second combatant maintaining distance. Secondary submerged contact still behind them. The captain reviewed the updated lines. No reaction, no shift in posture, just a quiet confirmation. They're disengaging. The word settled across the compartment without changing its rhythm. The submarine stayed deep, speed remained low, and the solution stayed ready, but unused. In another kind of story, this might have been the moment of retaliation. The instant when the hunted turns and strikes back. But that's not what happened. What followed was quieter, colder, and far more controlled. The American submarine held its position just long enough to make the outcome unmistakable. The lead Iranian warship, the one that had initiated the encounter and driven the first phase, now had to move forward knowing that somewhere beneath it, unseen, a submarine remained. It had failed to trap it, failed to track it, failed to force it into a mistake. And somewhere behind the formation, at least one more submerged contact lingered, silent, patient, reinforcing the same message without a single transmission. The message was simple. You made the first move, you lost control. At 5:24, the lead Iranian warship sent one final active sonar pulse into the water. The return came back thin, fragmented. No clear target, no confidence, no path back to pressure. Inside the American control room, the ping passed through the hull and faded into nothing. The sonar chief listened, then delivered the quietest conclusion of the entire encounter. They're checking space, not chasing. That difference mattered. It marked the true turning point. The surface ships were no longer shaping events. They were reacting to uncertainty. The captain of the American submarine gave a short, steady instruction. Maintain track. No unnecessary movement. Aye, Captain. Outside the hull, the ocean revealed nothing. On the Iranian bridges, no one could see how close the situation had come to becoming critical. They couldn't see the positioning that had formed against them. They couldn't know how many submarines were actually present. But they could feel the shift. Their first torpedo had missed. Their attack pattern had broken apart. Their sonar picture had multiplied and degraded. Their own movements had filled the water with noise, while the submarines below had grown quieter, deeper, and harder to follow. That was the real ending. Not destruction, exposure. By 5:25, both Iranian warships had created enough distance to ease the immediate pressure. Their courses steadied, their speeds settled. They no longer moved like ships advancing toward a confirmed target. They moved like ships leaving an area that no longer belonged to them. Inside the American submarine, the crew watched the range slowly increase. The fire control solutions remained ready. Still, nothing was launched. That restraint gave the moment its full weight. The submarine didn't need to act to prove control. It didn't need noise or spectacle. The outcome had already been decided through positioning alone. The Iranian crews had felt it in every uncertain report, every broken track, every widening maneuver they were forced to make. They had believed they were pressing a single, vulnerable submarine. Instead, they had entered a silent underwater situation more coordinated than they realized, and far closer than they ever intended. The first mistake had been identification. The second had been commitment. By the time both became clear, the encounter was already over. At 5:26 local time, the northern Arabian Sea looked calm again. 2 Iranian warships moved across open water under a brightening sky. Far below, an American submarine held the picture, held its silence, and allowed them to leave. They made the first move. Then everything changed. The submarine they thought they had cornered slipped beneath the layer, absorbed the opening pressure, regained control of the situation, and forced 2 surface warships to disengage without ever revealing itself. In underwater operations, that's how endings are written. Not with noise, not with spectacle. But in the moment, one side realizes, too late, that the ocean is no longer theirs.